Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is repeating his commitment to additional military spending, but he also appears this morning to be balking at the notion of doubling that spending in response to new pressure from Donald Trump. Trudeau is just wrapping up a news conference at the end of the NATO Leaders Summit in Brussels. You heard it live on CBC News Network. Let's listen in to some of what the Prime Minister just said.
It was a very strong, a very positive meeting where we reinforced the importance of NATO, reinforced the unity of NATO, and reinforced the commitment we have made, certainly encouraged strongly by the President over the past year to continue to invest strongly and continue to increase our investments in our defense capacities and our capabilities.
There you go. Now, just by way of setting up this next clip and understanding that, what the President of the United States said earlier this morning is that all of the NATO members have agreed to, at very increased speed, get up to their commitments to 2% of GDP on defense spending by 2024 or sooner, and then look at perhaps even increasing to 4%. So Canada right now at 1.23% of GDP on defense. But Canada last year announcing a new Liberal defense policy and budget, increasing the defense budget by 70% over the next decade to $32.7 billion. And what you heard from the Prime Minister today over and over again is that is Canada's commitment, stated before. No additional money is committed in the response to Donald Trump's push today. And this is our own Catherine Cullen as she attempted to get him to clarify and to be specific about whether any new promises were made.
You were very clear in Latvia the other day. You said, no, Canada will not be doubling its defense budget in response to a question about 2024. Is that still true today?
Yes, we are increasing by 70% over the next decade our defense investments.
But not doubling the budget, and yet Donald Trump is saying
70 is not doubling. Yeah. No, it's,
yet Donald Trump is saying, as you're aware, that all of the allies, NATO allies, and he was asked specifically about Canada today, are going to reach 2%. How do you explain the fact that he seems to think you've committed to this?
We have recommitted to our Wales engagements, the Wales commitment to reverse the decline in spending and increase our spending towards 2%. That's exactly what we are doing.
So there, the Prime Minister, as he answered Catherine Cullen's question. Let's go right to Catherine herself. She's on the phone now from Brussels and from that briefing room. Catherine, it was really interesting to try, you tried, everyone in that room tried to get an exact clarification whether Canada has committed to anything new. But I think the headline is it didn't sound like that.
Right, and I would say there are two interesting things, Heather. What I took away from that is no, Canada's plan hasn't changed since 2 days ago. We are going to continue, as the Prime Minister said repeatedly, to increase the defense budget by 70% over a 10-year horizon, not, though, reaching that 2% goal by 2024, which was that 2014 commitment. So that's a lot of numbers, but let's talk about, I think, even more interestingly, the Prime Minister's approach to everything this morning. It did seem that he was obfuscating, that he did not want to clearly contradict Donald Trump on the record. This is a very tense time between Canada and the United States right now. Trump made a very public declaration. So I was quite struck by the fact that the Prime Minister only seemed to be willing to express Canada's intentions in very particular ways. We are committed to that set of goals. I think by the end of that news conference, we understood that Canada is still signing on to the goals from a few years ago as a good principle, and yet will not meet those goals. Trudeau's message hasn't changed. It certainly hasn't changed throughout the course of this trip, perhaps even before, and yet Donald Trump is saying he personally is responsible for this massive change that's happened in the last 24 hours. So there was a contradiction there of the U.S. president, but it was done in a way as perhaps so not to provoke, because you will recall, of course, that the last time that these two men met, Donald Trump did feel provoked. When he left the G7 meeting in the Charlevoix, he tweeted some not so nice things about Canada's Prime Minister, calling him very dishonest and weak. And so I think Justin Trudeau was choosing his words carefully today, but it certainly did lead to some confusion about what it is exactly that Canada intends to do.
It was interesting going back to the Liberal defense plan. Yes, you're right. I mean, hitting that new $32.7 billion spending increase, that takes it up to 2027. So not the time frame, but working in that direction, emphasizing Canada's putting all of that money into new personnel and new equipment purchases, the warships and the fighter jets, et cetera. But it was also interesting to hear him reiterate the message you frequently hear from Canada's government about Canada punching above its weight and re-emphasizing the new leadership roles in Latvia and in Iraq, just announced in recent days. That's not spending, but that is still a restatement of Canada's commitment to NATO.
And he made an interesting point at the end of the news conference when he said, what you spend on your military budget doesn't necessarily lead to additional capacity for NATO missions. So what Justin Trudeau is doing in a sort of understated way is calling into question Donald Trump's whole reasoning on this. I mean, why is Donald Trump asking other countries to spend more? The idea is, as he has stated it, that the U.S. is taking on too much. So presumably other countries spend more on their militaries, and the U.S. can, in some manner, scale back its NATO contributions. The Prime Minister saying, listen, 2% of GDP, although perhaps he didn't say it quite so bluntly, 2% of GDP doesn't necessarily guarantee you a particular outcome for NATO. And, of course, that suits his kind of argument in all of this as well, which essentially is quality over quantity. Don't focus on the numbers. Focus on the nature of our contributions and highlighting the fact that Canada has taken on these new leadership roles, even though it doesn't really mean a lot of additional spending.
Okay. Just before I let you go, Catherine, let's just switch to another.